Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Daimonosophy 2.0 with your host, Paul Frederick.
No vision can grasp.
Greetings, friends and fellow daemons, and welcome to another episode of Daimonosophy 2.0, the only podcast fighting for liberty and the left-hand path. And you may notice that today I'm wearing my Pandemonium t-shirt. And the reason for that is that in a few moments we're going to be interviewing Ed Pandemonium himself, author of The Black Ship and many other awesome books. And he's got a new book coming out called the Karma book, and we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about his ideas regarding the concept of pandemonium and many other exciting things. So that's coming up, so stick around for that. Also, this is one of our initial attempts at going video with the podcast. So, you know, it's technology is like that. We like to press the limits and see how far we can go with things. So happy to have you here and join us in this process of discovery. So, a couple of things I want to talk about before we get to Pandemonium. One is to remind you all of the Flambeau Noir Conference 2018 that is coming up here soon. The International Left-Hand Path Conference in Portland, Oregon, USA, for 3 days of philosophy, magic, and art in Portland, Oregon, and that's on the weekend of April 27th to the 29th, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to have lots of good stuff with me. I'm going to have like some Black Flame Tarot decks and some books, and my uncle Janusz, who is the first guy to actually teach me magic as a child. He taught me how to palm a quarter. He's going to be there with me. He's going to be giving tarot readings with the Black Flame Tarot deck, so that's going to be really exciting. So be sure and come out for this. You don't want to miss it. It's April 27th to the 29th, and you can get tickets by going to www.flambeaunoir.org, or if you search Flambeau Noir on Facebook, you can probably find a site where you can order stuff. And that's FLAMBEAUNOIR.org. Flambeau Noir is an international left-hand path conference. It's an exclusive, esoterically oriented event inviting rebels and iconoclasts to revel together, exploring the latest in occult philosophy, literature, music, performance, and art. And in addition to myself, you will also see presenters such as Venus Satanis, the spiritual Satanist, Peter Gray, iconic occult author, co-founder of Scarlet Imprint, which makes some of the badassest looking occult books around. I've got a couple of them in my library and I love them. So super excited to see him. There's Reverend Stephen Johnson Leva, Michael Ford, Luciferian magic adept and author, Coyote the Blind, Mona Magic, Sean Donahue, Griffin CED, Thomas Leroy, Marcus McCoy, and of course our good friend Jeremy Crow, who we've had on the show here before. So very excited about that. So the second thing that I wanted to tell you about is Serious Workings Volume 4 is coming out soon. It looks like this. I'm going to hold it up here so you can see it. There we go. Yeah. Serious Workings Volume 4. So this is the fourth edition of the Serious Workings. And the Serious Workings is a journal of the work of the Esoteric Order of Beelzebub, which is an order of the Temple of Set. That's the one that I work in primarily. And so this is a compendium of workings, of essays and articles and reflections and magic and stuff like that. It's like really good. See, like you can see the table of contents there. Oh, it's kind of small. I know you can't read it, but there is chapter headings like creation of time during periods of acute stress, connecting with the Prince of Darkness. That sounds like fun. Gurdjieff and the Black Flame, two of my favorite things. And this edition has an exclusive interview with Dr. Aquino. So some of you might remember an earlier edition of the show, we did an interview with Dr. Aquino. And so not everyone knows, that was actually the second interview that I did with Dr. Aquino. We did a first interview, and due to technical difficulties, the interview wasn't usable for the audio on the show. Therefore, it was not used. However, I did get it transcribed, and so that's what appears in the book. And it's not the same as the interview that you hear on the show. I feel we get a little bit deeper into some of his mind war topics, things like 1984 and the police state and where we are as a society and as a culture. So it's fascinating. So, I mean, if it was me, that alone would be worth getting this book. And also, this is the first one that's hardbound. It's hardbound. It's high quality. Check this out. See? Gold printing on black. Awesome. All right. So that's all the good stuff. So let's go ahead and bring in Pandemonium. What's up, Pandemonium?
Very good to be here.
Very good to have you. So I've got the Pandemonium shirt on, in case
I see.
Anyone didn't see this earlier. I've got my Pandemonium shirt on. It's got like the panda bears.
Delightful.
Pandemonium.
Right.
So welcome to the show, my friend. I'm so glad that we finally are having the opportunity to do this. We've known each other for years. I've been influenced by your work for years, so it's awesome that...
Vice versa.
Thank you. Very glad we're finally getting the opportunity to do this. So let's talk about the left-hand path. What is your concept of the left-hand path? How did you come to the left-hand path? How did the left-hand path find you? Tell us about all that.
Well, we've talked about this a little bit before, but I'll just, skim over it somewhat. I was always pretty much left-hand path, and there are people who say that, so I'll elaborate. I got into magic, occultism, very young, very young, like elementary school young, and pretty much left to my own devices as a child. So I got into like a lot of nefarious things that adults would normally have put the kibosh on, if they were paying attention. And but that's just as well, because that's become my whole life over the course of time. And I can't say that I was strict left-hand path in the kind of philosophical way that I am now, but I was always, in spirit, in heart, left-hand path. I originally was involved with, just very traditional things that I was reading about, like the grimoires and traditional witchcraft lore and things like that. And then when I got a little older, into my teens, found out about chaos magic and Crowley and all those kind of standard things. Then in my 20s, I just went through a wide variety of diverse things that I won't even go into now because it would just be too many digressions. But by the time I was in my late 20s, I had, throughout my 20s, I had been kind of looking at the temple set in different ways. I even tried to join once when I was younger than when I did, a few years younger, and my letter got rerouted wrong or something like that, and I just didn't reapply because I was doing other things. And then finally, when I joined In my late 20s. I was 29. That's the very late 20s, right? So within a year, all of my things from the past had crystallized into this pandemonium concept that I work with now, and so that and my adept recognition were about the same time as each other, and basically what happened was I realized that all of my personal obsessions and interests that seemed so diverse, I had been worried about them because you get into a Crowleyan concept of true will and things like that, and I was like, well, what am I going to do with my life? Do I have to pick just one of these things, or can I fit a few together? And fortunately, I realized that this word pandemonium, being the capital city of hell in Paradise Lost, was a good umbrella term because all of the things fit together if I was building a city or a culture or something like that. So everything just kind of came to that point, and then ever since then, it's been 18 years now since that idea came to me. That significant number of 18 years.
No, that's a very significant number, isn't that?
Yeah.
The number of considered a
what
working.
Anton LaVey called a working, yes.
Right.
And it's interesting because when I put out the Black Ship, it was the 9th year, which is the peak, and that's just when it happened. I didn't plan it that way or anything. But those 18 years since has been things coming out of that point. Everything came to that point from my previous life, and then ever since then, things have been coming out of it. Like, for example, you go to the story, Paradise Lost itself, and the city of Pandemonium is brought into being specifically by Satan, Mulciber, who is a demon that is actually Hephaestus, or Vulcan, the classical god of metalsmithing and technology by extension, and Mammon, who is the patron or symbol for gold or money. And, if you look at that literally, then you have Satan as individualism, you have demanding the city be built. So the principle of individualism demands that pandemonium come into existence. Mammon, or economics, provides the substance, and then Mulciber, or Hephaestus, or Vulcan, provides the technology by which the work is actually done. And of course, we have so many new interesting technologies now that are, disruptive to previous social structures, especially along the idea of decentralization, decentralized money, decentralized manufacturing through 3D printing, things like that. So that was interesting. But then also just the word pandemonium itself has a triplicity in it because it means all demon place. So you think of the demon as the most ear-catching part of the word, and that, is comparable in classical mythology in some ways to what Crowley called the holy guardian angel. His Liber Samech, in as a matter of fact, is subtitled Congress with the Demon. So he used the term also himself. And there you simply have the idea of integrating the best part of yourself, and there are non-occult things like psychosynthesis and other psychological schools that deal with the integration of the whole psyche and becoming your best self and so on. So you have this idea of people becoming their best selves, which is, what we talk about with initiation in the Temple of Set, obviously. But these things can be explained to everyone in the world because these other philosophies and methodologies exist. Then you're talking about all the demons in Pandemonium. So you're talking about a community, you're talking about social dynamics, and so on. So then you have to re-engineer your social dynamics to be commensurate or reflect the new being that you've become. You're upgrading that part of your life. And then the place has to do with environment or, material culture, material reality. So what Pandemonium really ultimately is a continuum of existence that has a psychic dimension, a social dimension, and an environmental or material dimension. And the issue is in engineering your social and environmental dimension, those dynamics, in accord with becoming a greater and greater being. And thus your pandemonium comes into existence, and his pandemonium comes into existence, and her pandemonium comes into existence, decentralized in that fashion, but ultimately it all spawns an entirely new culture. And there are other triplicities and trinities too, like for example in alchemy you have sulfur and mercury and salt, in which I won't go into a digression about alchemy, but that's also applicable to the same thing. And then we could compare pandemonium to the stone in that way, and I often call pandemonium the black earth, and say that the black earth remanifests the black flame, because this continuum of existence, this ecology of consciousness or becoming, is what supports and draws out and remanifests that black flame. So that's been my guiding principle since I've been actively involved in the left-hand path, as the left-hand path, as opposed to just earlier notions of occultism and dark magic and whatever I was drawn to, just on a purely instinctual kind of level.
Absolutely. I agree with so many things that you said in there, or so many things that you've mentioned in there are things that I resonate with initiatorily. One thing you said is that, and I believe this is in the within the system of suggested in Paradise Lost, that individualism, the principle of individualism, gives birth or commands the principle of Mammon. Was that? Did I hear that correctly?
No, individualism corresponds to Satan,
Mm-hmm.
you would say, because Satan was the rebellious angel to begin with, and so that represents individualism, and Satan in the story is the one that commanded Pandemonium to be built. So we could take that allegorically as the idea that individualism,
Mm-hmm.
as a philosophy, as a viewpoint, as a way of being, demands this reconstruction of the continuum of social and environmental dynamics. It demands that Pandemonium come into being, because you can only really go so far without that supporting ecology and that reflecting ecology to sustain you and to also make further remanifestations possible.
Right. So the question is like, what kind of system is that? What kind of social system is that? What does that look like? Because I think that's something that's just completely like mind blowing. It's so mind blowing to most people to think that individualism can just reign, because
Right.
we don't have anything like that. We don't experience anything like that.
Well, because people have many fallacious ideas about individualism. They think it means that there's no cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say you can only really have cooperation under individualism. Otherwise, it's coercion. It's not cooperation,
Uh-huh.
unless it's voluntary. And I had been involved, with, like, for example, the Libertarian Party and things like that. I was the chairman of my county affiliate. I had run as a Libertarian Party candidate for the Florida State House of Representatives in 2002, and I had gotten into that kind of thing around the same time I was joining the temple. So it was on the one hand there was a political philosophy, and on the other hand a spiritual philosophy, and they were kind of informing each other, cross-informing each other, because they were both, individualistically
Mm-hmm.
based, and that's what helped me to define the left-hand path more precisely, more rigorously for myself than I had done previously. And now I'm obviously much more radical. I'm full-blown anarchistic at this point. So I mean, but what's that saying? What's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? 6 months on the internet.
Well, what is it? What's the difference?
What's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? 6 months on the internet.
Oh, 6 months. Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And still like a small shred of thinking that some aspect of a central authority is necessary to protect us from evil, or I would like to argue a sense of like original sin is still out there, so we need to have like a force to protect us from that and protect us from ourselves. And so I guess where I was going with my earlier thought about Mammon, and maybe you didn't say anything like this, and it just like bounced into my head for some reason. But the idea is that the principle of individualism, once it comes into being, it is connected with it predicates the principle of Mammon, which has to do, like you said, gold, money, but all of that represents modicums of exchange. All of that represents exchange of value. So one of the things that individualism makes possible is like voluntary exchange of value. It does not exist before individualism. There's no such thing as voluntary exchange of anything, because there is no voluntarism at all. There is no free will at all before individuality arises and enters the picture. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, of course, and that goes back to what I said about it being probably a primary fallacy that's out there about individualistic philosophy, is that it's anti-cooperation when it's entirely predicated on cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a slog trying to explain that in certain circles and so on. So but we just do what we do. I actually am not so much interested in like political issues of the day and things like that anymore, because I just see them as symptoms. I'm like, if you
mm-hmm.
follow this Pandemonium formula and you work on the people as individuals, if you create the relationships among those people, and if you create the technologies and the environments that support those relationships, then a lot of the political hullabaloo becomes obsolete and pointless, because it just fades away, because the new thing just evolutionarily goes beyond it.
Well, I think one thing, and I know
it might not fade away very quietly, obviously,
right.
You know how political structures are, but
no, it doesn't fade away. It's the nature of the beast that these political things sort of make a lot of noise and reiterate and encourage themselves and replicate themselves. But I think one of the things that's like really challenging about looking at current events and stuff like that is that it challenges you to try and think about what is the right thing to do, what is the right solution for this, and that's kind of at the root of like all political ideas and political memes and whatnot that comes out there. There's always an idea behind it. There's an ideology behind it that says this is the right thing to do. There's always like casting a judgment on one side or the other, and usually it's on the individualistic side that's being judged. That's why in our culture we've come up. It's been so naturalistic for us who follow the left-hand path to approach the idea of individualism and the idea of Satan, Lucifer, and the Prince of Darkness as being a representative of that, because some of the earliest mythologies that we come in contact with in Western culture is the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and you remove the political ideology from it, and rather than the serpent being man's downfall, well, he's like the awakening. It's the awakening of individuality within beings, and this idea of a precious gift being in there. But for my experience, and this, I don't think it's too far off from yours in principle. But for me, political questions and political ideas and stuff like that, and controversies, there's always like a disappointment with it. You get excited and wrapped up in something. You think, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And then later on, you think, well, it's not. Someone actually, everything they do actually hurts someone else, whenever force is applied on a mass scale. And so there's always these contradictions is what I'm trying to say. There's always these contradictions within it. And for me, it wasn't until I started getting into these real basic, fundamental ideas of the left-hand path, of individuality and personal responsibility and rational self-interest and all of these things, that you start to see that, wow, there is actually a consistent position to take on these questions of the day. There is a consistent position to take on it, which is the generally the right one. It's the moral decision, and once you understand that the individual is the basis from which everything else flows, then it starts to set things right.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the ultimate thing, is that only individuals are real.
Mm-hmm.
You look at, for example, the government. What is the government? Can you point to the government? Can you show me the government? You can show me a building with people inside it, individual people operating under a set of ideas, wearing uniforms, cosplay,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. So, but that's all it is ultimately a phantom that people are operating under, and so it's not something that's like entrenched. It's not a natural law. It's not a structure or function of the universe, so which is how the status quo or the powers that be are like often thought of. So just to kind of repeat what I said a few minutes ago, most of the political questions that we have today are questions that can't be answered in the way that they're phrased, in the way that they're framed. So you have to kind of get up outside of them and like come at them from like a right angle, so to speak, and the way to do that, I think, is these things like you work on the individual person, make individual people better, help them to make themselves better, I should say. Let them form the kind of relationships that match the people that they're becoming, the beings that they're becoming. Mm-hmm. And obviously from there you're going to create institutions, and it works from the bottom up rather than the top down, creating those institutions. And meanwhile you're creating environments, you're creating new technologies and things, and it just kind of, it's an organic process rather than a architectural process. So I would say that Pandemonium was perhaps not actually built but grown is possibly a better way to put it. So
absolutely, grown and cultivated. Cultivating Pandemonium is something that makes sense to me. And so I'm remembering one of the most profound things I recall you saying when we were having a discussion about Pandemonium is that specifically talking about Pandemonium as it appears in the Diabolicon. Now, this is essentially telling a story about an anarcho-capitalist social system,
right?
Emerging out of what? Out of order, basically, or emerging out of like it's like
imagination, will.
Yeah,
imagination and will of the demons,
and yes. Freedom, and an experience of total freedom away from a central authority source.
Right, and of course, in the beginning, it was rough going. The Pandemonium was a little bit wild, and they got it under control. But you'll notice that it just kind of came under control out of a process of mutual taking it under control, rather than
mm-hmm.
Lucifer had become Satan at that point, and he wasn't like handing down a list of rules as to how it was supposed to be. I mean, it doesn't really say how it happened, but you can imagine from everything else that's in the Diabolicon that wasn't happening, that Satan wasn't like showing, okay, well, here's our org chart that shows how Pandemonium works, you know. So
here's our 5-year plan.
Right. So
no. So if anything, I think indications are of the opposite. So the thing that I'm thinking of, and I can't remember where it is in the Diabolicon. At some point the daemons are talking about, well, we need to like the power of the black flame, the power of the gift that man has received is so powerful that he might accidentally hurt himself or someone else with it. They might accidentally hurt each other with this. So maybe we should go down there and we should intercede with them to make sure that they don't hurt themselves with it. Which, of course, I mean, that's the excuse of all governmental intervention programs, right? That we need to, and all, you know, any sort of central authority has that idea that, you know, it has the good guy badge of this is why we're going to intercede and we're going to limit your freedom because we're just afraid you're going to hurt yourself with it. But the daemons like make a really specific decision in the Diabolicon that no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to interfere because then we would just be like the angels. We'd be like the bad guys, the central authority that we just spent all this time getting away from. And now we're going to go oppress these other beings the way we were oppressed. I don't think so. But we'll connect. We'll reach out to them. We'll connect to them so that, man knows that he is not alone. We'll, give him clues and stuff like that. We'll have a voluntary exchange.
Sure. And before we move on to any other topics, I want to stress or rather take the opportunity to recommend this book. You know that I recommend this book all the time to everyone. The Future and Its Enemies by Virginia Pastoral is about the philosophy of dynamism versus stasis, and it is the Diabolicon. It's the same exact message. It's the same exact story, but whereas the Diabolicon is written in a spiritual and mythological fashion, Virginia Pastoral's book is written from a point of view that is, very much grounded in the real world. Has tons of real world examples, stories of things that have happened, things like that. And it's an incredibly important book. It's possibly, after Harry Brown's How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, I would say it's the second most important book for anybody living on this planet to read. And I guess between the two of them, those are the square and the compass, the warp and the weft of the Pandemonium concept as applied to the completely mundane world. The philosophy is expressed in those two books.
Excellent. So another book out there that you wrote is called The Black Ship. And I know this is a book, I read it, I loved it. I know a lot of people have read this book and it had a really profound effect on them spiritually, initiatorily. So how does the Pandemonium concept integrate with the Black Ship? Is that part of your the overriding theme within that book? How did that get involved?
Yes. The Black Ship is entirely an explication of the Pandemonium concept and the initial explication of it, because the first section deals entirely with this idea of demonic integration that I spoke about before, and consecrating your home, things like that. It's basically creating your own magical version of Pandemonium in your own home with your own people. There are further sections, 4 sections in the book altogether. The next one deals with things like essence, described as blood, and that relates to either Zoe or the Hambled Zoin in Gurdjieff, and that we talk about in our own work, both of us. And the third section is transmogrification, which is a deeper form of transformation and becoming. And then the final section has to do with cosmic alchemy, which is all the different perspectives that have to do with changing environments or enjoying environments more fully, and things like that. The two key things that run throughout that book, though, are the mandala archetype and the sabbat, similar to the witch's sabbat in a way. But as there's two sabbats, there's a great sabbat, which is like the witch's sabbat. It's a chance to do very extreme things, to push yourself and find new things that you can reintegrate later. And the lesser sabbat, which is not actually lesser by any means, but had to call it something, right? is more of a weekly kind of meal and home time with the family kind of ritual thing that is basically all about enjoying the space that you have, enjoying the companions that you have, like in the present moment, enjoying whatever level of pandemonium that you have right now, because pandemonium can be two people in a room, or it can be a galactic society or cosmic society, and it can exist at any of those scales in between. But you want to be sure that you're enjoying what you have now and not just waiting for some future development. So, and the mandala, of course, represents this as an archetype of wholeness, and represents pandemonium as a whole in that way. So that's what that book is about. So that gives some people some tools that they can use.
And then also the daemon gets involved with that too, right? The idea of the Socratic,
Well, that's the very first thing you do, is invoke your own personal demonic self into your life. That's step one. And then once you've done that, you start consecrating tools like you would do in any kind of magic, and then, consecrating your home, and then there you've done it. You've brought the demon through into your tools to create a space. So I mean, that's in the first section of the book before it even goes on to other more involved things. But once you do those basic things, you've created pandemonium on your own scale.
And is that the idea of daemonic integration, that by invoking the daemon, or identifying that aspect of the self that is the daemon, or the higher self, or
right,
or the holy guardian angel?
Yes, it is. It's you bring. On the one hand, of course, we have this tradition of the holy guardian angel through Abramelin and Crowley and Thelema and that kind of thing. And then on the other hand, we have Roberto Assagioli, the psychosynthesis school. And this is kind of an idea that mashes the two together, So demonic integration is the idea that you bring this demonic characterization down and integrate it into your mundane human personality. And then you start examining the unconscious subpersonalities that exist within your psyche and bringing them into alignment around this axis so that you're unified and integrated. That's what you're doing in psychosynthesis, but it's the same thing as in Abramelin. What do you do in Abramelin? You invoke your holy guardian angel, and then you conquer the princes of hell and the demons. It's the same psychological process. So recognizing that, we can use psychological processes, we can use neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, things like that. On the other hand, we can use full-blown ritual, everything from the occult tradition. We can have all those things, and whatever works to satisfy that process and to make it work.
So some of these things that you're talking about here, they start to resonate with, I feel like, some of the ideas that I was working with in Daimonosophy. And,
right.
I feel, other people have commented that these two books, The Black Ship and Daimonosophy, are kind of companions, and they're both sort of have this revered,
We discussed that before it even came out. That's why I wrote the introduction for you.
Right. No, which absolutely, I totally appreciate. And, I feel like Daimonosophy, it's like we kind of took some of these ideas about the daemon and demonic integration and started to move into more of the social level of it. And I realize now a lot of what I was trying to do was trying to unpack, and this could be said the airbeth transmissions as well. I'm trying to unpack that question about, okay, what sort of like reality does this like create with all these beings? You know, once you know, you as an individual, a regular person. I mean, we all start as just, you know, regular, you know, dumbasses in life, right? And then we find you know, the right kind of material. We find the right kind of other people, and then we start to make progress, and then we encounter the daemon, and then maybe we experience demonic integration. We start to become daemons, and so we start to emerge into this new sort of reality. And so then the question becomes, how do we continue on from there? How do we interact with others who are emerging, and how do we interact with those who have not emerged? And that's where it becomes very challenging and problematic, because we have a society which doesn't always appreciate these sort of activities. Most concepts of religion in our society are not about emerging as an individual. They're about obeying, being obedient and following the rules, and having children, and doing all the good things that you're supposed to do according to a central authority source. So that's where it gets like very challenging, I think. But so and another common theme I feel that ran throughout them is the idea of substance, the idea that there's a substantial or even a super substantial aspect to all of this stuff, which goes back to the idea of the black flame, like you said, Hembledzoin, the idea of
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about substance in that way, and I'm talking about the black earth. Mm-hmm. I mean, it comes down to much the same thing. So.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of black earth, let's talk about something else you've been working on for a few years called the Blackheart campaign. And
yes,
does it have to do with Joan Jett?
I hope so. I would love to have. Well, Joan Jett is a pretty Blackheart kind of girl. I mean, aside from the whole backup band name and everything, you know, right. You look at her whole career.
You know, she's going on tour this year too.
Is she?
She's opening for Styx.
Oh wow!
Seriously.
Wow.
It's for real, dude. It's gonna happen.
I'd kind of like that more the other way around, but okay.
I agree, but you know,
I saw Joan Jett at Guavaween in Ybor City here in Tampa many years ago. I think it was 1996. She was one of the bands playing and opened with Cherry Bomb. It was pretty fantastic.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
I think Blue Oyster Cult was like on the other side of the field. They were playing too, so it was like right around the same time.
Oh wow!
Buck Dharma from Blue Oyster Cult lives here in my town.
Is that right?
Actually. Yeah, it's kind of bizarre.
So you know, Blue Oyster Cult was always one of those bands when I was a kid, like in the 80s, where that album, I can't remember which Blue Oyster Cult album it is, but it's like got a fold down. It's got all these guys wearing blue, like they got hoods on, and there's like
right,
and it's that symbol which was later used in the John Carpenter film Prince of Darkness, right, to represent the symbol that, like, you know, once you're, you know, possessed by the you know, by the dark side, you get this symbol on you. So there was part of the urban legend of where I grew up is that Blue Oyster Cult were Satanists.
Oh yeah,
and that was dispelled so fast. So once you start studying a little bit, it's so fast. No, nothing to do with it at all. You know.
Well, it's funny because they drew a lot from Lovecraft, and I'm a fan of Lovecraft. I often say I write Lovecraftian nonfiction, and I was at the local historical society one day, and he was telling me his son had written a book, because I was trying to donate a couple of my books to their library there, and he was saying, yeah, well, my son wrote a book. Are you familiar with H.P. Lovecraft? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of him, yes. And his son had written this book about H.P. Lovecraft and so on.
Wow.
So I was thinking, between me and that guy and Buck Dharma, this is a pretty eldritch kind of Suncoast town.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Well, so we digressed a little bit there. We were going to talk
Yeah.
about the Blackheart campaign. Let's
Yes,
get back to
yes,
that. Let's
yes.
get back to that.
Well, what the Blackheart campaign started out as was just the idea that, like, I had been a political activist, as I talked about earlier, and been just involved in a lot of underground subcultural things of different types. And you come up in those kind of things, you get like really resentful, you get bitter, and finally I was just thinking about how, there's a popular kind of new agey saying, energy flows where attention goes, and the vice versa, attention goes where there's energy to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, all this energy being expended on the things that we hate or the things that make us angry, I mean, sometimes that's necessary, but we would do so much better to redirect some of that into the things that we love, and especially if those are like obscure or taboo kind of things, or just alien or odd sort of things. So I said, okay, take this idea of the black heart as like a symbol and use it to draw people's attention to this principle, making this shift. So wrote up this manifesto for it, put the symbol out there, and it never really took off in that way. I mean, it may still at some point, but so far it really hasn't. Our friend Lloyd Keane did some black heart art events there in the Great White North, and that was really about it. But the idea continued to evolve with me into a larger concept of like the psychology of pleasure. Nathaniel Branden talked about the psychology of pleasure, and I thought that was a good counter to, well, not counter, but corresponding with the idea of indulgence from Anton LaVey, and the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and seeing indulgence as a factor that works all the way up that hierarchy of needs, and even with Crowley there were things like this, and to an extent we know that thelema doesn't necessarily mean will in the sense of intention, as more like will in the sense of a desire. Although it is used magically as intention now as well. So, but I mean in the original meaning of the word desire, like when we talk about God's will, we're talking about what God wants. For example, because thelema is used in the Bible, rather than God's intention. But I mean, it's hazy. There's obviously a lot of overlap between the two ideas. But this idea of desire and deep desire, and bringing these deep desires out and feeding them as indulgence, and that goes back to the things we've talked about with food in Fourth Way, especially when you get into like impressions as food, you get into that. And so I just started to see this this process of using desire more and more as the fuel for becoming, and will in the form of intention as willpower, that kind of thing, as the means. So becoming, Kepher, we talk about that in the temple, is the thing that we want to do. It's our aim, it's our purpose, and thelema is a means of becoming. But I started to ultimately see desire and indulgence as the why of the whole process. And if you apply it to that Maslowian hierarchy of needs, you get up into self-actualization, and in a way, this becoming that we pursue, this is the most essential indulgence of the self. So we're just indulging the self's desire to come into being, to become more of itself, and just to be more. So
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's a really important question, is like, what fuels this and what feeds this? I mean, it's really profound to say that that the desire precedes will, or it allows will or predicates will. Desire or need or wish for something is always behind that, but it's not always that clear from the surface. So it's definitely a profound thing to look behind that and see that desire is there. And I think I don't know if this is where you were going with it, but I mean, really, it's like that. It really gets down to indulgence, and I guess, like you said, that then you can see like indulgence, like how that actually is relevant, going all the way up the Maslow's hierarchy. It's really at every level.
Right, and that would also correspond to Gurdjieff, the different kinds of food that feed the different bodies, the different aspects of being, map right onto that Maslowian hierarchy. You can take that hierarchy and map that onto the egg model of the soul that exists in psychosynthesis, where you have the lower unconscious drives and then the higher unconscious drives, and the everyday material kind of drives are in the middle, and it all kind of collapses into a single kind of thing. And so I'm kind of at a indeterminate point. I'm feeling something kind of new coming out of that. But it's not really clear enough to talk about yet. But that's where I've come to with the black heart idea and the black heart material. So.
Well, that's excellent. And so and people can find out about the Black Heart campaign online,
sure.
Right? There's what kind of resources are there?
Well, I have a Black Heart Facebook group that I just, anything that kind of catches my eye, whether it's like an article on the psychology of pleasure or the chemistry of pleasure in the brain, to just a model that I find pretty that day, or something, or some other particularly striking image that speaks to me of desire in that way. So, and since I do most of the posts, it tends to reflect my own desires and aesthetics more, I guess. But always open to have more discussions there on the group if people want to have them.
Right. Well, excellent. So let's talk about the Karma book.
The new book.
Let's talk about the new book. You got a new book.
I do.
It's coming out. That's awesome.
It's out already.
It's out already. Awesome.
Yes, it came out in the beginning of February.
Okay, perfect.
It is called the Karma Sutra.
Okay.
So clever, right?
Well, I think I might have read. I think I might have read this. It's been out for a long time, then, huh?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Don't get mixed up. You'll get very different results. As I told them on the recent interview that I did for Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, we just did one where we talked about this book in depth for about an hour and a half. So, but we can certainly give it a little bit of attention here as well. Yes. Well, karma is the fabric of everything, because karma is simply cause and effect. It's frequently mischaracterized, but that is what it ultimately is. It means cause and effect. So we look at the world around us, it's made up of causes and effects, and the effects are the causes of new effects and things like that. So everything that we experience is karma, essentially. And so that obviously is very relevant to the Pandemonium concept, as I explained it earlier, because we're talking about the thing, the energies and processes by which the world is continuously being made and remade around us. And well, I was going to say interesting, but it's actually somewhat problematic. The idea is that most people do not even engage with the idea of karma, because they think of it as a kind of new agey concept. And the people who do engage with it, especially in Europe, the United States, that kind of thing, engage with it from a New Agey perspective that's not correct. They bring a kind of Christian morality into it, that karma is judging people and handing out rewards and punishments accordingly,
Right.
which is not actually true in the sense that they mean it. Of course, you can be rewarded and punished by cause and effect, but it's not conscious. It's completely impersonal. It's completely mechanistic. And so if karma is the substance and energy of everything that we experience, and most people aren't engaging with the idea at all, and a lot of people are engaging with it incorrectly, then obviously you have a problem there. So what I wanted to do was create this course that is not traditional at all. It talks about ideas and concepts from Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, that kind of thing, but is not entirely true to them. It draws in ideas and practices from many other disciplines and areas, whatever I thought would work the best to this specific theme of the lesson. There are 9 lessons to be worked over the course of 9 months, like a pregnancy. And also
Wow.
the number 9 is very important in karma, because there are 9-year cycles in karma, similar to what we talked about at the beginning of the program.
Wow.
And each one comes at it from a different angle, so that you get a wide variety of processes and ways to essentially stop the karmic process for at least a moment, so that you can get some consciousness in there.
Uh-huh.
Get some consciousness and responsibility in there, instead of simply reacting mechanically as people so often do, and ways to alleviate and burn up karmic patterns that exist and create a little bit of freedom, so that you start to unravel your own karma, and thus the greater karma of the world. Because the one metaphor that I use is the idea of pulling a thread unravels a fabric. So if you can unravel your own karmic fabric, then you become the thread being pulled in the world's fabric, and the more people work the course, then the more of that occurs, and you can at least get a community of people who have cut their puppet strings, to use another metaphor,
Yeah.
and cut their puppet strings from being tangled up with everybody else's puppet strings, and
Right.
get just a tiny little bit of freedom to
Right.
act consciously and undeterministically. So
Wow, that's excellent. So, listening to you talk about it, one of the things I thought about when you said that, so the traditional way that people talk about karma, the common way, popular way, is people conceive of the idea of karma as being a system of reward and punishment for actions based upon a ethical system that comes from some central authority figurehead.
Right.
And it's really the way you're approaching it is it's really like making a left-hand path versus right-hand path distinction. Now we're talking about it's the same things happening in the universe, but
Sure.
we're talking about the laws of cause and effect, and we're striking away the illusion, the delusion that all of this stuff is being managed by a central authority, or could be managed by a central authority. And obviously this is a very popular idea that a central, authority could manage, all the billions of people in the world's transactions and do that effectively. And religiously they think God does that, and conventionally people will tend to think that the government can do that. So that's one point I want to make, is that it in one sense it feels like you're making a right-hand path and a left-hand path distinction about karma. The other thing I was going to mention is Ouspensky, in his book New Model of the Universe, I believe, he talks about yoga. He has a chapter on yoga, and he talks about there's 5 or 6 kinds of different yogas out there. Hatha yoga for breathing, Jnana yoga for something else, so on and so forth.
Right.
There's the yoga I mean, most people, when you say yoga, they think of, the kind where you move your body around and
Asanas.
yes, exactly. Um, but then there's also karma yoga. He talks about karma yoga, and he
Oh,
says
right. Yeah.
karma yoga is the yoga of observing the laws of the universe. Like you said, observing cause and effect in the universe and deriving principles based on that. And it's a very intellectual pursuit. And he pauses. He pauses in his expository on yogas. He pauses on karma yoga to say this is like really important because really a lot of things are very similar to this. I think in one sense he considered that Gurdjieff's system was basically a form of karma yoga evolved into a more Western sort of paradigm.
Well, yeah, it is. It is important for the reasons that we just went over because it's everything that's going on is karmic.
Uh-huh.
So, it's of ultimate importance. And I have called this course because I actually wrote it about 3 years ago. It took a while to get it out, and that's kind of an interesting story in itself. But I'll just say that like it seemed like the universe did not want this book out there. Every possible thing that could go wrong,
Right.
and getting closer to publication and
Like-
glitches in files and things like that.
Like
but
what?
it's out now.
Well, like what? Tell us. No, what happened? Tell
Oh
us what
well,
happened.
there were first of all just a lot of issues in my life personally after I did the book, and I was also doing karmic rituals at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of burned away a lot of things in my life to a certain extent, and made things worse instead of better at first, and so that was the major delay in getting it out. Then as we got closer to publication, there were just, like I said, glitches in the files. Our friend Fergal, he does
Mm-hmm.
the book covers.
Uh-huh.
He had issues going on, in his life at the time that were kind of like, making it not really his top priority to be involved with the project. But thankfully, he did. Do our cover, which is very nice, and there were just then there were like money issues, like there was an emergency like right the day before publication, and had to remake the fees for the printer out of like doing a kind of fire sale on advanced copies and that kind of thing. So just lots of little things, but towards the end, but it just really started to feel that way.
So it was almost like the process of bringing the book to market was a lesson in karma.
It was, yes, and I've been telling everybody over the course of these years about it that I've been calling it Left Hand Path Karma Yoga
Mm-hmm.
explicitly, but I don't really need to call it Left Hand Path because I say that to our Left Hand Path people so that they'll pay attention, because I feel
Yeah.
like karma is a thing that they would normally not pay attention to.
Yeah.
And so I call it that just to get their attention. And but it is what it is. It is what is out there. It is what works, So
Yeah.
you don't really have to call it Left Hand Path.
I think you're making such a important point there that's like worth stopping and pausing on. And that's the idea. There's so many things I think that we can apply this to. And it's the idea that left-hand path, and that term left-hand path, is sort of a necessary convention of where we are in place and time at this point in civilization. And that when we go back, well, left-hand path is just essentially means the real path of individuality. This is just it simply refers to the spiritual path before someone came along and said, well, let's take the symbols from this spiritual path and turn it into a system of coercion and force and control to exploit people with, and then it became the religion, and years later people like wake up and realize they need to like somehow split away from this, but they still want to maintain, they want to do something with the core essence of these ideas in there that seem like valuable, and then the idea of an alternative path, an alternative spiritual path, starts to emerge from that. Because I was thinking about the same thing when I said that. When I said this is like kind of like a left-hand path karma. Well, when Ouspensky is talking about the different kinds of yoga, he's not. He doesn't make that distinction. He says, no, this is just like karma yoga. And most people misunderstand it and think that it means that there's a universal system of ethics, an intelligent system of ethics that's working out the rewards and punishments for every transaction that occurs in the universe. But no, karma yoga simply means cause and effect, individuals interacting
Sure.
in the universe.
I think maybe like bhakti yoga, devotion yoga, is the only thing that we would call right hand path. But even that doesn't necessarily have to be true.
Right.
I mean, because you know, we on the left hand path, we love things. We are devoted to things in our way, you know, and it's not a submission to those things in the way that a right hand path devotion would be. So you might want to make a distinction between right and left hand paths in something like bhakti yoga, but the karma yoga just is what it is. And if you were talking about right hand path karma yoga, you would be talking about essentially, if it was going to do anything, if it was going to have any kind of effect, it would be essentially what we call left hand path practices with some kind of religionist gloss over them, you know. So
excellent. And so so the book it's a course study, you said, it goes through like 9 parts, and it's like stuff that you can do, like what kind of things, like observational things or
right.
Like
Well, the very
ceremonial things.
All of those. You know, most of my books tend to be just big glorified lists of things to do, exercises and things like that. And my thing, because some of the things I write about are new and innovative, and they're different from past systems. So I say, just do the things and see what happens, you know, rather than taking my word for it. But these lessons start out, the very first lesson just explains historically different kinds of karma that exist to provide an intellectual understanding of the subject, so people get clear on what it is and what it isn't. And I think that starts to unravel your karma a little bit right there. And the only exercise there is to just sit and think about the forces that led you to be sitting where you're sitting, and the forces that led to that, and so on, working your way backward through cause and event, chains of action and reaction. And I mean, if you did it thoroughly enough, you'd get back to the creation of the universe, obviously. But the idea is just to do that for a month, and you start to think karmically. So you're training your brain to think karmically. The next section, which is probably the biggest lesson, has the exercises for learning to enhance your willpower and to detach from your thoughts and emotions and get a certain amount of mastery over them. And those are the skills that you really need to get on with the rest of the work. And then you get into some things that are rituals and like practices for living as you go through. You deal with, for example, some past life regression issues, which is a thing that people associate almost automatically with karma, is past lives and things like that. But I assure the reader in there that you can either take this as psychological material or as a literal past life if you believe in reincarnation, that kind of thing. But either way, it doesn't matter. Treat it like a dream. Treat it like something your mind is giving you to analyze, and certainly don't identify with it, because if we're asking people in the book to break their identifications with their own character issues in this life, we certainly don't want to then latch on to something from a life that you're not living anymore, even if it was real.
Right.
To you know, that's there's no purpose in that.
So what's your personal take? I have to ask, what's your personal take on that? I mean, do you think reincarnation does that happen? Is it a possibility, or?
Well, I don't think anything is impossible necessarily, but I'm entirely agnostic on the issue. They asked me this on the other interview that I was talking about. And just told them I was completely agnostic on the subject. And there's an issue of like resolving karma with your ancestors, which is an extension of the ancestor work that I put in the Black Ship, and you know, you can take that psychologically too, and anybody can work this book regardless of their belief system, because it's just things that you do, and then and I'm like, do the things first, and then you can analyze and explain what happens after you've had an experience, you know. So, and then for example, the other big thing in karma that we have already touched upon is ethics. There's an entire lesson on ethics where you do a moral inventory similar to what they do in Alcoholics Anonymous, that kind of thing, and try to make some restitutions. And where you can't make restitutions, there is a ritual for that, just to kind of psychologically relieve yourself of it, or to magically relieve yourself of it, depending on, again, what your own personal belief system is about it. It works either way. And each of these lessons, different people will probably get different effects out of them. You know, some will be impacted by one lesson more, and another person will be impacted by a different lesson more. But I think that ethics and moral inventory lesson is one that will obviously have a lot of dramatic impact for people in the present moment when they work on it. Because those are the social issues and life issues that are usually most heavily weighing on somebody's mind, either consciously or unconsciously. So.
Right, and there's a conflict with that too, because I think people often, when people are trying to break away from the right-hand path, and I don't know, for some reason, you know, you and I, we probably tend to meet a lot of people who are trying to break away from the right-hand path, but a lot of the issues that they have with that is that they're trying to reject this morality from this like previous system.
Right.
And so what some people do, I think mistakenly, is to reject the whole concept of morality and the whole concept of ethics, and to conclude that you know, we live in an amoral sort of universe where those sorts of things don't matter, and you just do whatever, and things are more based on feeling and whatnot. And you know, the ironic thing is that everyone does come back to ethics and morality, and you have to come back to it because it's part of being human, and you do it, I think, like you said, either consciously or unconsciously.
Well, it goes back to the very beginning of our conversation when we said that it was a fallacy of individualism, that people think we don't believe in any kind of cooperation or anything, but obviously we do. Our whole existence is predicated upon it. We just want it to be voluntary cooperation, and the cooperation has to be voluntary by definition, as we said. So that's where your ethics and your morality comes in. And so that's another fallacy of the left-hand path spiritually, is that kind of amorality that you talk about. And in this particular lesson that I was describing, I have the person do the moral inventory based on whatever system of ethics or morals that they believe in. But then I have them do it again based on, you know, what we call the non-aggression principle, the idea of not acting coercively to other people as the central principle. So you're really doing two moral inventories, unless, of course, the non-aggression principle was what you started out with. So.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, man. That sounds so exciting. I can't wait to read this book. And this is through your publishing company, Horngate Media.
Horngate Media, yes, and it's on Amazon.com. That's right there for everybody. So excellent.
And I'll get a link from you too when we put this episode up and on SoundCloud and iTunes and stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's just the Karma Sutra by Edward Pandemonium on Amazon.com. It'll come up
easy enough.
For it, yeah.
Awesome. So it is the Karma Sutra. It's not the Karma book.
Right. The title is Karma Sutra.
Okay. It's Pandemonium's Karma Sutra.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, very cool. So what about this? How does explain to me this? How does Bata, the Rite of the Hornless One, fit into all of this?
The Headless One.
The Headless One.
Well, it really doesn't all that much. That's just a thing that we had as a private conversation. But the name of Set Bata, the name of the aspect of Set called Bata, it means, well, Ba doesn't really mean soul, but a Ba is part of the soul complex. But if you're translating the name, it can roughly mean something like soul of bread or soul of earth.
Uh-huh.
And we were talking again about substance. Like if we're talking about soul of earth, then Bata is more on my side with my black earth concept and the world soul and things like that. If we talk about soul of bread, it gets more on your side with Epiousios and so on. And the idea of the world soul, we often think of Leviathan, as the world soul. Leviathan specifically as depicted in the the Diabolicon, the statement of Leviathan, more so than in the grimoires when they talk about Leviathan. But it's all kind of interconnected there. And Don Webb, in his book, The Seven Faces of Darkness, he talks about this rite, the rite of the Headless One, which is the original Egyptian ritual that the Bornless ritual from the Golden Dawn came from, in Crowley's Liber Samek, which I mentioned earlier, which is the invocation of the demon.
Mm-hmm.
And he associates it in the book with, he associates Bata with that ritual, and associates Bata with the constellation of Draco. So, and of course, Draco was the polar constellation through ancient times and much of classical antiquity, and
But in the previous manifestation of Bata, with the Crowley ritual, it refers to bread.
well, the Bata is not in the Crowley ritual.
Oh, okay.
No. Bata is an aspect of Set. We talk about the tale of two brothers, the ancient Egyptian story, where Bata goes through all these different transformations and eventually becomes Pharaoh and eventually becomes a god, and so on. That's where that name comes from. Is Egyptian.
So the bread.
Don Webb associated it with Bata. You would have to ask him why and how, because he doesn't really say in the book where that connection comes from.
We'll find out. We'll find out from him later. But but in the original, the rite of the Headless One, there's a bread. Where does the bread come in?
There isn't bread.
There is no bread.
No bread. Just this name Bata can be translated as soul of bread, and Don Webb connects Bata.
Oh, I gotcha.
See.
No, I see where that's coming from. So that's that connects with Epiousios, because in the passage from Matthew, where they say, "Give us this day the daily bread," is originally translated with the word Epiousios, which is supersubstantial, which give us this day our supersubstantial bread. So, so that's very significant, and to me, that all connects back with, the idea of higher substances that we consume, like you mentioned a couple of times throughout this, the idea that we consume different degrees of substances, we transform them within us, and then regurgitate them out to the universe.
If Bata can be associated with Draco, if that is a legitimate connection, then it's interesting. The Ophite Gnostics, they would lay out bread on a table and let snakes kind of wind their way around through the bread, so you're getting this snakeified bread that they were then using as a kind of Eucharist. It's there's definitely some interesting connections there.
Dude, snakeified bread, I'm writing that down. There's something we can do with that. Sweet. No, that's all wonderful things. I mean, I absolutely 100%. The idea that everything comes back around to the idea of, first of all, recurring themes that we're talking about here is that individuality and freedom necessitates the concept of exchanging value, and that the idea, once you have the possibility of exchanging value, the motivation or desire is always driven for maximizing that, for exchange, for creating the highest amount of value, and not just obtaining value. I think that's one problem when people have when they when they start looking at these ideas of exchange and stuff like that. I mean, that's like one of the kind of the Marxian idea that, well, any kind of exchange is just someone exploiting someone else. So any kind of exchange is basically theft.
The idea that there's a loser in every transaction, right?
Right.
Somebody gains and somebody loses, without taking into consideration the subjective nature of the value. So.
Right. The subjective nature of the value, and also that the exchange that occurs is not just an attempt to grab and take this value. It's an attempt to create value, to remanifest value, to remanifest a higher level or a higher octave or higher manifestation of value. And I mean, that I think is something that what you were talking about with the Karma Sutra, doing a deep dive on one's values, exploring one's values, one's moral fiber and everything. That's something that helps one get to the point where they understand that these exchanges are about creating value, but also you begin to understand the significance of trying to make that effort to produce a higher level of value.
Absolutely, yeah. And that goes back to, I said I wasn't going to digress into alchemy, but
go for it. Do it.
You have, as I say, the components of the stone. The sulfur is the essence of a thing, and the mercury is the kind of transmissive, communicative substance, and then the salt is this like substantial substance. So you would, for example, to make gold, you would somehow extract the essential goldness of gold and apply it to a certain amount of suitable mercury that you would then project onto a suitable salt, and the salt would be transmuted into gold. So again, you have an essential concept, a communicative, transmitting concept that makes the exchange possible, and then you have the substantial just basis onto which it's all projected.
Yeah.
And that relates back to that same trinity or triplicity in the Pandemonium formula that I spoke about at the very beginning. It touches on what you're talking about right now, and of course when you're talking about substance and so on, our both of our concepts of either the epiousios or the black earth, as I call Pandemonium sometimes, it's all there.
Yes, it's all there. It's all there. It's all there, and it's all happening.
Right.
Well, excellent. Well, Pandemonium. Any final thoughts for us this evening?
Well, obviously, everyone is in a terrible karmic mire and needs to rush to Amazon.com and purchase the Karma Sutra as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. Your very life depends on it, obviously. And I hope they check out the Black Ship as well if they're inclined along those ways. And I'm always looking for people who appreciate these ideas to interact with more personally, as that is part of the formula. Mm-hmm. And I think we've covered everything pretty well.
I think we have. Well, thank you, Pandemonium, for spending this time with us this evening. Yeah,
well, thank
everyone.
You for having me.
Absolutely, everyone who's listening to this, go get the Black Ship, get the Karma Sutra, go find Pandemonium online, go on Facebook and find the Blackheart campaign, a group on there, and connect and make things happen.
Build your own Black Ship.
That's right. Build your own Black Ship and help us all create Pandemonium on Earth.
Yes. Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah. Shemham Farash.
Yes. Well, before we go, I'll tell you, I feel that the Shemhem Farash in the satanic ritual was a placeholder for the coming of Pandemonium, because the Shemhem Farash just means the name, the 72-fold name. And if you look at what that means, you're talking about perhaps the 72 demons of the Goetia. So you're saying Shemham Farash as a shorthand way of saying all the demon names simultaneously, or invoking the kind of continuum of all those demons. So they didn't have Pandemonium yet to say, but we have it now. So.
Wow. That's deep, man. I'll buy it. No, people, you heard it here first.
That'll be my next.
Shemham Farash was the placeholder.
The show.
Yeah. Shemham Farash was the placeholder for Pandemonium. I'll buy that.
All right. Well, thanks again, and you have a good night.
All right, brother. You take care.
Take care. Kefir.
Kefir.
Where did he come from? The answers lie in another part of the universe, some 40,000 light years from our own sun, on a line with the constellation we call. Eve, the fifth planet out from its sun. Eve, the fifth planet out from its sun.